Howdy all, this is Shane. I'm going to talk about how to get a great guitar tone and how to set up your amplifier. This is probably the most common question I get on my YouTube videos as well as private messages, is how have I set my amp on the demo video. Now, there's a couple of different things to think of when you're setting your amp up. The best thing to do is to find a sound that you like to start with. It might be, someone that you listen to, or someone that you aspire to sound like. You don't really have a frame of reference on tone, then you're never really going to be able to get a decent tone out of your amp. You might be able to get something that's usable, but if you're asking questions on how do you get that tone straight from an amp, then you may have to take a step back to take a few steps forward. I think one of the most important things about getting a good tone is knowing how that guitar or amp could or should sound. I very rarely buy an amplifier these days without a really good idea of what guitars work well with it, who plays it, what kind of sounds I can expect from it, and is it a classic combination? Like, is the guitar as good with one amp as another? There's plenty of classic combinations, Les Paul and a Mesa Boogie, or a Fender Strat and a Marshall, or a Fender Strat and a Fender, or a Telecaster and a Vox. So these are the combinations that you're probably just going to get the most and quickest sounds out of. Now for me, I know that a Vox, AC30 or AC15 and a Telecaster sound great together. Not to say that a Telecaster doesn't sound great in other amps, but it's a tried and true combination right there. Some amps have a better dirty channel than others. Some have a great clean channel, and some have a not so great clean channel. So it really depends on what you want to start with. Now, if you want that creamy blues tone, you could get that out of a Fender. You could get that out of a Vox to some extent. But if you're after more of a chirpy sound, you'd probably choose something else than a Fender. Fender's highs aren't really what I consider nice. They're more rounded off. I mean, their top end is nice, but it's not that chirpy AC30 kind of vibe. And I mean, it's all personal choice. Not one's better than the other at all. So it just depends on what you like, but have a frame of reference if you like, say, the John Mayer tone or the Eric Clapton tone. You need to find an amp that's really going to come close to that to some extent, and then shape your sound through pedals, through picking and attack technique, as well as listening and trying to get it right. I lost count of the amount of times I used to try to get my Epiphone 335 and my Traynor amp, which was a great combination of amp and guitar, to sound like the Hyde Park sound from Eric Clapton's live concert. That was my benchmark of tone. As I changed amplifiers, I couldn't quite get that sound anymore, and I sort of got rid of that guitar. But as I moved on to know that I really liked my Strats and Telecasters, I found it a lot easier to get a usable tone out of those, and a more motivating tone for me. It was clearer and just more direct. It didn't have that woolly overtone that some of the arch tops have to my ear. And it's not hard to go out and look for an amp that's got a great clean tone or a great dirty channel. What's really tough is to find one that's great at both. And you'll find if you want a clean channel, like a really good clean channel, you're gonna have to get a 40-watt amp. And if you want a great dirty tone, depending on the volume, you can start anywhere from 15 watts up to wherever you want to go, depending on the brand and depending on the volume. If you want the natural tube tone versus like a serious high gain amplifier. So there's variations in there. And when people say, how do you have your guitar set? I have it the way that I have in my head, and that just comes through experience. I know how my tone should sound, and I could almost plug into any amp that's of fair quality and get the same kind of sound. It might not be exactly the same, but that's just down to the amp, the speakers, the tubes, all of those kind of things. So what I find is I know where my benchmark is in my head now for not only EL84 amps, but like 6L6 Fender style amps. I work with those settings I have in my head, and I make a compromise and get the sound that I like in that room Some rooms you might need more treble, some rooms you might need less, and it depends on how hard you attack the guitar as well. You'll find if you don't attack the guitar very hard, your tone's not going to be any good regardless, and that's true for just about any style of music. If you dig in and play the notes clearly and with emphasis on the note, you'll find it will jump out of the amp a whole lot better. Mark Knopfler always said the best amplifier is a pick. I mean, he uses his fingers most of the time, but he was getting at that depending on how hard you pick the guitar, the notes will determine how good or how loud it sounds out the front. And digging in really changes your vibe. It really does. You can't expect to get a great blues tone without playing with a bit of bite, with a good technique in blues. So when people say, how do you get that tone? In bedroom levels, it's harder at lower levels to get a great tone. But if you've got it like a 15 watt amp or even smaller than that, it shouldn't be hard. Just have a frame of reference to how you want it to sound. And get an amp that really suits the style of music you're playing. If you see other people with an amp and you like the sound of that, that's a good sign. If everybody has similar amps and you don't like the tone, don't buy that amp. Just because other people are playing blues or country with or rock with a particular type of amp and you think, well, maybe I should just get one of them. Get one that you like the sound of, because that's at the end of the day what you're going to like. And make sure it sounds somewhat similar to what you have in your head. Otherwise you're just going to be unhappy and you're going to go on the big tone search that we all do, and I don't think you'll ever get it right the first time. It's taken me many amps to find sounds that motivate me, and I like the EL84 amps now. But not to say one day I won't go back to the Fender sound, because I probably will, but I don't think I'll stay there. I think I like having the alternative to the EL84 sound. But yeah, I think it's, to get just one amp that does everything you like, it's pretty tough. There are amps out there that do have great or extremely good clean and dirty channels. But if you like the dirty blues tone, find the dirty blues tone from an amp that's going to give you that sound. It might mean you have to crank the clean channel up as loud as it'll go, or you might have to use the drive channel because the clean channel is too glassy or too lackluster, whichever way it works. Or the drive channel might be lackluster like it is on a lot of Fender amps, except with the exception of a few. But yeah, there's some amps that just don't sound great loud either. Like a 20 watt amp isn't going to sound clean full blast. If it's on clean, it's going to go dirty, and that's great for blues players. But if you want a big clean tone, that's not going to be the way to go. It just won't work. So think about these things, think about where you play, and then take it from there. Make sure you don't buy an amp that's just got 100 watts if you're only going to be playing at small places. You're just never going to get the most out of that. And I've seen that happen so many times. People buy 100 watt amps and they turn them on and get them to a volume that suits the room, and they sound crap. Stick to working on your chops. Make sure you can play to a point where the notes that you play are clear and loud, even when you're not even plugged into an amp. And that will be the biggest thing that will change your stage or amp sound. That, and the fact that you need to find that sound or recording that you really like and basically try to mimic that and see if you can get close to it. You might find it sounds different but just as good, or different but not as good. You might have to play around with the amp or pedals just to see if you can get that sound. And if you can get something you're happy with that stands out, then that's mission accomplished. I don't expect everyone to be able to go out and buy high-end amps and high-end pedals. You don't really need to these days. You can get a great sound just from one pedal and an amp, or no pedals and certain other kinds of amps. So think about that. Don't go buying all kinds of pedals if the amp doesn't sound great, at least on clean. Because you're never going to get the benefit of using high-end pedals with an amp that just doesn't sound good to start with. I should also make note, when you start trying to get a sound out of your amp, put everything at 12 o'clock, meaning all the dials right in the middle of the EQ. And you'll find that you'll know straight away whether you need more bass or less bass. I think bass is kind of like the most overrated thing for a guitar amp. You don't need lots of it. You need enough so you know that it's kicked in. But if you're playing with a bass player, you don't really need, heavy amounts of bass on your tone. And then mix the mids and treble and presence and reverb to your liking if you have those options. But just start in the middle. Start flat and see what kind of tone you get. And don't play with your guitar on like 6 or 7 on the volume. Always turn it right up. If you need to back off the volume, then turn it down on the guitar if you're playing with other people. But I'd always suggest, if you're doing a solo, never play with your guitar down. Never. So I hope that helps.